I stand here today, I never expected actually when I agreed to speak here, that I would stand before you having been convicted by a majority of the Supreme Court justices of being someone who bears malice and ill will towards another class of human beings. But that is what today's Supreme Court decision has done to those of us who speak up in defense of marriage. Nevertheless, we are impelled to speak in defense of the truth. And so what I would like to talk to you to talk about today in particular is about the idea that marriage is a permanent, I'm going to talk about the definition of marriage and focus in particular on sexual difference as the basis of marriage. If you look on the USCCB website, there's a web page that the bishops have called Marriage Unique for a Reason that is fantastic. It is a wonderful resource, especially the frequently asked questions sections. They go through, everything's broken down easily. It's quite comprehensive. So taking the definition of what a marriage is from the USCCB website, which I know is also cross-referenced with the Catechism as well as canon law, marriage is a permanent monogamous union between a man and woman for the good of the spouses and to bring children into the world. Now, one of my own philosophical specialties is Christian anthropology. It's a course I taught years ago at Mount St. Mary's Seminary, and at Franciscan I teach a course called Philosophy of the Person, which is what Christian anthropology really has to do with. So Christian anthropology tells us that the person is an intimate union of body and soul. We live through our bodies. What we do with our body shapes who we are, and who we are affects what we do with our bodies. We are made for love, body and soul. In fact, Pope John Paul II refers to love as an ontological imperative. We are made to love and to be loved. And this call to love others and to be loved is manifested in many different ways, but in a unique way through the love of a husband and a wife. For in marriage, the husband and wife come together in a communion of persons, literally joining their bodies in a physical union, an act of love that is so powerful and creative that through it, a new person potentially may come into being. The union of man and woman is unique and is so powerfully creative precisely because of sexual difference. In church teaching, we use the term complementarity, which is the idea that men and women, with their differences, complement each other. We finish each other and we complete each other. Sexual difference is not simply a difference in body parts, nor is it a series of roles imposed on us by society. Instead, it is a real distinction between men and women that has to do with their ability, physical or spiritual, to be a mother or a father. In Mulieris Dignitatem, Pope John Paul II described the interior sensitivity that characterizes women, a sensitivity that stems from their spiritual motherhood. Women are made to be mothers, he noted, physical or spiritual. They are oriented interiorly. They are more sensitive, more nurturing, more compassionate. All of this so that they learn to pay attention to another person, even when you can't see that person, when that person is developing inside of your body. At the same time, we can look at men and how they are constituted and made to be fathers, spiritual and physical. Men are oriented exteriorly. They are action-oriented, results-driven, forward-thinking, with a sense of responsibility for others that impels them to sacrifice even their well-being for the good of their families and their friends. This vocational aspect of the person permeates everything we do and causes men and women to act, think, and even love in different ways. And this sexual difference that is rooted in these physical and emotional differences between men and women is essential to marriage, and it is that through which both men and women flourish in the family. This sexual difference is ordered toward the good of children. Children need a mother and a father. Mothers and fathers play different roles. Mothers are nurturing. They pay attention to the emotional and physical well-being of their child. They tend to be very detail-oriented. Fathers mediate between the child and the world outside of the family. A father mediates through his strength, his physical presence, his attention to results, and his constant action and sacrifice on his child's behalf. It is no surprise, then, that sociological data demonstrates that children do best in homes with their biological mother and father, that the absence of one or the other leaves a gaping hole that leaves the child at risk for a number of undesirable outcomes. Similarly, we see sexual difference at work in the unique way that men and women love each other. Women typically are nurturing for their husbands. They pay attention to their immediate physical well-being. Tell me now, men, how many of you have been nagged by your wife to see a doctor? That tends to be what women tend to think about that. And men tend to protect and support their wives, caring for them, again, in this external, results-oriented way. And this complementarity of the spouses proves to be physically, emotionally, and socially beneficial. All of this highlights that marriage is intrinsically opposite sex. The two ends of marriage depend on the complementarity of the spouses, the total communion of persons, physically, psychologically, and emotionally, and the generation of new life. In both cases, in both of these ends of marriage, the differences between the spouses add up to one whole. The two become one. Now, if you reject this, what are you saying? You are saying that sexual difference does not exist in a meaningful way. Underlying this denial of meaningful sexual difference is the idea that we confer meaning on our own bodies, that it does not have an intrinsic metaphysical meaning of its own. According to this view, the body exists as an instrument that can be used and manipulated to suit our own psychological or physical gratification. If you look at same-gender sexual acts, they are not by nature or by kind essentially life-giving. If you look at same-gender sexual acts, because they are not able to generate life, they cannot achieve the total unity or self-gift of the physical union of a man and woman. Same-gender sexual activity lacks the communion of persons that is the result of this sexual difference that is essential to the sexual union of a man or a woman. Moreover, and more alarmingly, the child has a, well, it's not alarming that the child has this right, but it is alarming in light of the Supreme Court decision. The child has a right to a mother and a father. The child has a right to be born of the love of a mother and a father. And the child has a right not to be born as the product of the reproductive technology industry. There is a real difference between the unintended reality of single motherhood or fatherhood and approving the formation of alternative families that by their very nature and constitution deprive the child of either a mother or a father. Now, in recent years, in light of the prevalence of same-sex households, and in line with this tendency to deny meaningful sexual difference, there has been a tendency to talk in our culture about parenthood instead of motherhood or fatherhood. In support of the contention that the important thing is having two parents, regardless of whether they're same-sex or opposite sex, in 2005, the American Psychological Association issued a statement stating that there was no disadvantage to children in same-sex households. Similarly, in 2013, the American Academy of Pediatrics opined that it was more important for a child to have stability and financial security, among other factors, than to have a mother and a father. This is a reduction of motherhood and fatherhood to functions, rather than a recognition of the essentially relational and irreplaceable nature of motherhood and fatherhood. Now, in 2012, there were two studies published in the journal Social Science Research. In one of them, Louisiana State University's Lauren Marks reviewed the data that was the basis of the APA conclusion, the American Psychological Association conclusion, and found there was no empirical support for the APA claims. Their studies were too small. They compared the children of same-sex couples with the children being raised either by single mothers or by single fathers. Their studies relied on self-reporting by parents and discarded, incidentally, reporting by teachers as being too subjective compared to the reporting by parents. And their studies tended to focus, a number of studies focused on nebulous outcomes, such as gender role identity, rather than pointing to outcomes like substance abuse as adults, incarceration as adults, relationship problems as adults. Lauren Marks pointed to a 1996 study by a sociologist named Sarantokis that found disadvantages for children who are being raised by same-sex households that are similar to what is known in sociology as the fragile family, a family of two cohabiting adults, or single-parent families. Similarly, a study published in the same journal, the New Family Structures Study issued by a sociologist from the University of Texas named Mark Regnerus, found that children in homes with a parent with a same-sex relationship were as at risk as children of single parents, again, confirming the results of the previous study from 1996. Lauren Marks's review highlights that both the APA and the American Academy of Pediatrics are crossing the line into advocacy, ignoring decades of research that illustrates the importance to children of their mothers and their fathers. Now, here it is important to note that when we talk about this, we are not talking about the individual, we are not casting aspersions on the parenting of each individual gay man or lesbian woman. It is not a question of whether or not a gay man can be a good father, but rather that he cannot be a mother. And similarly, it is not a question of whether or not a lesbian woman can be a good mother, but rather it is that she will never be the father to her child. So how did we get here? Because I think it's important to look at why we're where we are. This did not suddenly come on us. You can trace the origin of today's Supreme Court decision, and in fact, Justice Alito in his dissent does exactly this. You can trace it directly to the sexual revolution, which cemented in our culture the separation of life and love. With the contraceptive pill, people became used to the idea that you could have sexual intimacy without the life-giving generative power that is inherent to it. Once you accept the idea that marriage is essentially about companionship, with children being one option among many, dogs, career, hobbies, travel, then gay and lesbian couples should indeed deserve the title as well. The contraceptive mentality is truly at the heart of the efforts to redefine marriage. In a sense, when so many people in our culture, Catholics included, bought into contraception, we already redefined marriage to make the end of procreation optional rather than essential. Going along with that, we can point to the resulting rise of reproductive technology. If you can have sex without babies, then why not babies without sex? This was initially billed as something that could help infertile married couples. But now, reproductive technology is a method of choice for gay and lesbian couples who desire to have a biologically related child. And as Justice Kennedy's questioning in the Supreme Court hearing on Proposition 8 illustrates, the push to redefine marriage took place in the context of same-sex couples with children. He was very concerned about children feeling stigma because their parents weren't officially recognized as being married. In addition, over the years, the education establishment has portrayed the traditional family as one option among many equal options. Again, this was motivated by a desire not to make a child feel a stigma, but unfortunately, this conditions children to see the traditional family as one option among many. Moreover, we have an explosion in the pornography industry, where individual gratification, again, is seen as the primary end of human sexuality. And interestingly, there was a study done in 2012 that linked support of same-sex relationships to frequency of use of pornography amongst heterosexual men. So, where are we headed with this? Well, the implications of today's decision are far-reaching. Marriage is in deep trouble, but it was in deep trouble before. There is a documented breakdown of the family, especially among those who can least afford it. Couples who are have a low education status or who are in a lower socioeconomic group. The illegitimacy rate, in 1965, Daniel Patrick Moynihan published his famous discussion of raising concern about the status of the black family in America. Well, at that point, the illegitimacy rate in the black community was 23%, and now it's over 70%. But it's not only the black community, and to focus on race is to miss the larger picture, because where the illegitimacy rate has really exploded is in these lower socioeconomic groups. And the high rate among the black community merely reflects the fact that so many blacks, because of this illegitimacy rate, continue in poverty. Okay? So we know marriage is in deep trouble. If marriage is redefined to include same-sex unions, then truly there is no logical basis to exclude anything else. And before people castigate me for raising the slippery slope argument, I will repeat what Father DiNardo said. I can remember 15 years ago when people first raised the possibility of marriage being redefined, and we were accused of raising the slippery slope argument. In fact, literature that's being published now is raising this very point. Scholars now are marshaling arguments in favor of polyamory. Polyamory is another term for group marriage. Scientific American, in February 2013, published an article entitled "The New Sexual Revolution: Why Polyamory May Be Good for You." And that is not the only article in which this was published. In 2010, there was a Boston Globe article highlighting polyamory as one of the potential options for people in their sexual practices. And truly, even for things like incest, there is no logical basis. Once you disassociate marriage from procreation, there is no logical basis for excluding something like incest. Because if marriage is only about companionship, then why not? Right? With recent victories, point number 3, with recent victories, proponents of marriage redefinition are starting to openly discuss how marriage will be transformed. And universally, they agree that marriage now will be marked with what they refer to as a more fluid and flexible arrangement. At risk are the characteristics of permanence and monogamy. Lesbian relationships are at double the risk of breaking up. Slate Magazine's June Thomas, in an article recently, wondered how successful lesbian marriage could be, given lesbian women's tendency to bond intensely and often, as she puts it, a gift for breaking up. Gay men, on the other hand, more often tend to have relationships that are marked with infidelity. In a 2011 profile of gay activist Dan Savage, the New York Times' Mark Oppenheimer describes him as monogamish, ISH, meaning sort of like, I guess, carrying out your affairs within the stability of a marital arrangement. This leads, again, as I said, proponents of marriage redefinition, and these are the cheerleaders of today's decision, to speculate that marriage is going to be altered in ways that will truly change the character of what marriage is. Moreover, the health insurance battles are far from over. In addition to pushing for abortion services to be covered, HHS, Health and Human Services, could now very well demand that employers cover reproductive technology for those who are quote-unquote reproductively disadvantaged. Gay and lesbian couples who turn to reproductive technology to enable them to have a child that is biologically related to one of these couples. Again, these are not my words. There's an article in March on the Huffington Post featuring a professor from Georgetown and a professor from Harvard arguing just for that. Finally, keep an eye on the public schools. In Massachusetts and now in Colorado, transgender children are able to use whatever restroom they choose, and the heterosexual child who complains or feels uncomfortable is told now that they have to work on their acceptance and overcome those feelings of discomfort. So what is our next step? Well, If marriage is in trouble, truly these are self-inflicted wounds. Again, as I mentioned before, this results from the deliberate separation of life and love that occurred with the sexual revolution. In Humanae Vitae, Pope Paul VI diagnosed the problem even before, as it was just beginning to occur. Pope John Paul II, thank God for Pope John Paul II. Truly, we would not even be in the game without him. Pope John Paul II was the first to describe the cure, an authentic understanding of the person in light of Christian anthropology. So what do we have to do? Well, we as Catholics, we have to really step up our game. We have to do a better job of presenting church teaching in its entirety, in its beauty. It is a tremendous gift to others, and we must be living it in our lives. We have to be prepared to fight this battle state by state, because these recent rulings make it clear this is going to be an uphill state-by-state battle. We must pay attention to educational norms in the public schools. This may be a losing battle. I don't have a lot of optimism about this because the groundwork has been laid for years. And the recent decisions in Colorado and Massachusetts illustrate that the public schools are going to conform to the demands of the transgender and gay lobbies. And this will make it increasingly difficult for Catholic and Christian children in the public schools. With this in mind, we have to really, really focus on both our Catholic schools, which must be preserved and made affordable, and focus as well on making our religious education programs vibrant and places, safe places where children can go and really absorb a Christian anthropology without being made to feel like they're some kind of hateful bigot. And finally, we must push back on these religious liberty issues, because all of this is linked. All of this stands and falls together. The HHS mandate, these recent Supreme Court rulings, Roe v. Wade, all of this stands and falls together. There is an assault on the dignity of the human person. This is the latest manifestation of this. But take heart, because we do have the truth on our side. And if nothing else, history shows us that the truth does not compromise and wins out in the end. And certainly there is a joy in living our faith and in witnessing our faith to others. And so I encourage you, keep up, fight the good fight, and don't lose heart, but be prepared. We do have a tough road in front of us. Thank you.